Izuku Midoriya. He's born with a loving mother and a father that is a bit absent. Izuku Midoriya finds that, well, he's in love with the idea of being a hero. He loves the hero All Might and believes that he'll be just like him when he grows up. At the age of only 3 to 4 years old, he's basically fanboying over All Might. The fact that he's so strong, he's so awesome, he'll save everybody. He brings down the crime rate so much, he'll save everybody and everything. But there's a hidden truth to hero society. There's a hidden truth about villains. Some villains are just misunderstood. Some heroes are not so hero-like. There are many things that people don't realize about hero society, and many things that people need to realize about it. But some quirks that are out there may be completely and utterly useless. Others may be actually useful in some regards. But what about one that is very useful but has severe repercussions? Well, that's what happens when you have villains. There are villains out there with insane repercussions and insane aspects about them. With that said though, Izuku Midoriya was born with a special type of quirk. A quirk very similar to a villain's, but one that wasn't as hurtful to himself. His quirk would be known as a clone quirk. When he goes to the hospital and his mother and him head over there and arrive to meet with a doctor, the doctor runs some tests and learns of his clone quirk, not knowing much about it though. He says that he can most likely make clones, but there's no guarantee that these clones will be in full control of Izuku. Will they have the same personality, same emotions? They're not sure. Izuku is definitely taken back by this. He doesn't really understand the whole complexity of it, because if he can't control all the clones, what does that say for basically what they're going to do? He never knows. What if they get him in trouble later on? Well, obviously he doesn't know for sure. He's just a little kid. He's just worried about certain things, and his definition of getting in trouble is getting mud on his shoes. So it's not too big of a deal at this moment, and maybe won't be a big deal at all in the future. But Izuku would just learn about his quirk, try to use it, and eventually at the age of about 8 or 9, he would use it for the first time ever. He would separate himself, and the clone that he makes has these red eyes. They're just like his green ones, but the tint is red instead of green. He's confused. He waves one hand and the clone waves as well, and he asks if the clone can understand him. And Izuku's clone responds coherently, but it's odd. It's as if Izuku responded in his mind, but it's all on his own. He's not actually doing it. It's just a subconscious thing. So it's as if he is connected to these clones. He then asks the clone some questions, and these responses are a little bit more anger-filled, you could say. They're more angry. He asks if the clone could do homework for him, and the clone says yes, but he would rather not, and he would, if he would just be not lazy, Izuku could do it himself. And when he hears this, he realizes the clone has different emotions compared to Izuku, maybe ones that are deeper down within his body or deeper down within his personality. Izuku does get mad. Of course he does. Everyone does. And in terms of homework, he's like, I don't want to do homework. So that's the version that's mad. He's mad, but he'll do what Izuku says. It's interesting, actually. Izuku tries to separate himself again, but can't. It's too much for him. He's actually a little tired out already trying to even do it, so he won't be able to actually separate himself again. He does ask a few more questions to this guy, to himself, which is kind of odd when you think about it. But he does ask some questions to the anger version of Izuku, but nothing really comes out of it. He doesn't learn anything that he doesn't know already. It seems like these versions of him know exactly the amount he does. It's just the emotion of a certain version of him is inflated. Izuku thinks that this is a-okay, and he goes to grab his can or some sort of bottle to open, but he can't get it open. He thinks that it's too tough. It's like maybe it's glued or something. But he then takes it, or the anger version of himself takes it, and he twists the cap off, and it shatters the cup or the bottle entirely. It actually rips the plastic straight off. Izuku immediately thinks that maybe these clones have different quirks. Yes, he has a clone quirk, but Izuku just made a clone. He has red eyes, he's full of anger, and he just ripped the bottle in half. Most humans can't do that, and he's so young. He's like 8-9 years old right now. So how is he able to do something like that? Well, Izuku comes to the conclusion that this person, or this version of himself, must have some strength enhancement quirk. Izuku then uses his subconscious to control him slightly, and actually basically forces him to pick up something that's very heavy and then smash it in his hand, in which he does just that. And it smashes a sort of brick-like fabric, or a brick-like material in an instant. This is crazy. He's so strong. But then as he does this, Izuku's clone, the one with red eyes, disappears. He's confused, but then he collapses slightly to the ground and sits down. He's exhausted. Whoa, this is insane. Well, of course you're exhausted. You're dealing with two versions of yourself at the same time. This is something Izuku wasn't ready for, and something he didn't really understand. And especially when you're utilizing a quirk, it drains stamina even more. So now he has to worry about the drain of his clones, and also the drain that the clones have with their own quirks. Something that is gonna get very confusing. But later on, he would start using clones to help him with daily chores, and also help him with homework, just to get things done. But of course, since things are based off of Izuku's knowledge, there's things that Izuku doesn't know. So he can't just have his clones do work for him that he doesn't understand. So basically ignoring class and doing stuff like that is definitely out of the picture, because if he sends a clone there, the chances of them actually learning those things are pretty darn low. And this is something that Izuku doesn't even want to risk anyways. So he doesn't. He learns the best he possibly can, and of course, in terms of working on stuff, in terms of homework, he would do homework, and then he would have his clone do the other half of homework. So it's like they're splitting the work, and since they're built on the same subconscious, the clone thinks that this is a great idea as well, which is perfect. You're not going to get some evil clone of yourself saying that he's the real one and trying to kill you. So yeah, I mean, who would kill people over homework? With that said, Izuku starts training, frankly just working hard and trying to get his studies up. With the help of one of his clones, and the only clone he can really actually make at this moment, he's able to do schoolwork and train at a way higher level. Using his clone, he can also train just physical, just fighting somebody else. Yes, his clone has super strength, but he's able to subconsciously make him hold back so that they can have a pretty or relatively decently fair fight. This does get him a good bit of training before anything happens, and throughout the years of basically elementary and middle school and heading up to the end of middle school, Izuku would get a lot of progression done. Throughout this time though, Izuku wouldn't be the most popular kid in the school. By far would be kind of a weirdo in a way. They all think that he just talks to himself and so on and so forth, and Izuku's only friend is kind of himself, which is kind of sad, but still, he's kind of the weirdo, but he's not really hated or made fun of that much. Bakugo, on the other hand, just, he's the best and this on and so on and so forth. But with Bakugo does mess with him, tease him, make fun of him. It's really the same thing with Bakugo. Nonetheless, though, Izuku continues his training, and as they approach the end of middle school, he's at a pretty good spot, he feels. With his solo clone with red eyes and super strength, he feels that there is a good chance for him to get into somewhere like, UA. Somewhere that he really, really, really wants to get into as we speak. Izuku, on the last day of middle school, would listen to his teacher as he speaks about, giving out these job assessment tests. But, of course, he decides not to do that. He throws the papers in the sky and says he knows that all of them want to go the hero route. The hero route is something that every kid wants to go. Good quirk, bad quirk, no quirk. I mean, we've seen it all along. Every kid in Japan practically wants to be a hero. And maybe that has a lot to do with All Might, or maybe that has a lot to do with some of these top heroes that people idolize. But Izuku especially wants to be a top hero in the future. And Bakugo, though, makes it clear that nobody else should be trying for UA, and many of the people there believe that to be kind of true. Nobody should try to get to UA, because frankly, Bakugo has that on lock. There's no way that anybody else would get into UA, but Izuku thinks otherwise. Izuku wants to try for UA no matter what. He wants to be a pro hero, and this right here will be the biggest and the first step to getting there. Of course, Bakugo mocks him, saying that he shouldn't even try, he's just some loser, but Izuku doesn't care. Izuku's going to push his limits and try his absolute hardest to get there, which is exactly an Izuku or a Deku thing to do. After getting berated by Bakugo, of course, I mean, it's just the Bakugo thing to do, but the teacher, of course, tells him to calm down, quiet down, and so on and so forth. And there's a couple things he begins to explain, past just obviously them wanting to be heroes. But beyond that, there's really nothing too important. The day would finish up and Izuku would continue writing in his journal, thinking about what is ahead and what is next. He begins to imagine and think about different versions of himself, those of different eye color and those of different versions and different quirks. Now this is something Izuku has thought about a little bit, but not to the point that he's really instilled it in his own mind. Maybe that's what's needed. And he begins to focus as hard as possible, trying to think about what's going on. And as he heads under this bridge, he continues to focus more and more and more until his focus is broken. And that's because something has just busted its way through a manhole cover. He turns around to see a giant sludge villain. The sludge villain, with his menacing voice, tells Izuku that he needs his body. Izuku tries to run away as fast as possible. He's terrified. He's freaked out entirely. Izuku begins to try and think, I need to run faster. I need to go. I need to escape. As he begins to think this, as he can feel the sludge villain breathing down his neck, his eyes begin to change color, changing to this yellow, electric-y like color, and as it does, his body splits. His hand reaches out to his own hand, grabbing onto it as they bolt off, escaping from the sludge villain, and from nearby, they can hear a roar of some sort, and then a smash, a crash, and a giant gust of wind slam into a building. And as little pieces of green goo fly up above, they are 3 blocks away staring at what just occurred. Izuku is completely in shock, completely in horror in a way, but he turns to see the person holding onto his arm is himself, a version of himself with yellow eyes. But that version collapses, disappears, and re-emerges back into Izuku almost instantly. A version of Izuku that has an energetic personality, that has a quirk based around extreme or super speed. Izuku is shocked. He was able to, get away. He was able to escape. Now this is insane. This is something he hasn't even thought about, something that he didn't know what would happen. Now he has 2 versions of himself he can create, 2 versions that he can make. But just as he thinks about this, he immediately has to sit down, extremely winded, and can feel that his body is tired, as if he's going to fall asleep. He pulls up his phone and he calls his mother, calls her and tells her exactly what occurred and what happened. He's safe, he got away, but he's extremely tired. So tired to the point that he feels like his legs are jello. He doesn't know if he can even walk. And his mother immediately comes by, helps him, and gets him in the car as they go back home. She helps him get ready and get iced up and basically help him feel okay once again. Izuku would feel okay relatively quickly at that, maybe only a couple days. It was just the strain he put on his body using that part of his quirk. It was as if he made a clone that he was unbeknownst to, a clone that he had no idea worked, And when he made that clone, on top of that, to the strain that would put, he used the maximum amount of power to escape. The clone used the maximum amount of power to make sure that they were safe. So, of course, that would put a strain on his stamina like crazy, but at the same time, it allows Izuku to see his current ceiling, his at a point of time where he is at this moment. Izuku likes the feeling and enjoys the thought of this. He can make himself so strong, make his clones extremely powerful. He really can. And maybe there's something more that he's missing, but that's something he'll have to figure out some other time. For now, he'll recover and he'll begin training, getting ready, and just trying to focus on getting prepared for what's ahead. But when that happened, when he showed his clone Quirk, there were people watching. Someone actually saw this happen. It was actually one of the pro heroes, one of a minor pro hero. All Might even asked what that flash of light was when the person just disappeared. What was it? A pro hero would walk up and explain to him exactly what happened. It was a boy with green hair. One of the boys had yellow eyes and the other had green eyes. They were exactly the same beyond that. They didn't have different clothes. They didn't have, different hair colors. They didn't have anything. It was just the eyes. That was it. It must have been the same person. All Might is interested. This person, he must have some sort of quirk that allows him to duplicate himself. Maybe he has some sort of speed quirk. Maybe that's the reason why it looked like there was two of them. Now this person right here, they're talented. They have to be. For a pro hero to have their jaw drop to the ground. Someone like this, or whoever this person is, this green-haired boy, he must be talented. But All Might can't really think about that much. He still needs to find not only his successor, but he needs to find out what the hell he's going to do with his time limit. So All Might begins to try and find that so-called successor. Find that one person that he can give his quirk to. And eventually, he would decide on that one person. He would decide on someone that is not necessarily very known and not necessarily even in Japan. Izuku, on the other hand, is currently training at a couple beaches, a couple parks, and anywhere that he can kind of be alone. Eventually, he would decide to head over to Dagobah Beach. Dagobah Beach, a place that he's basically worked out before, so he thought that nobody would be here. He begins to run down the pier, focusing, trying to get that electrical feel, trying to get that speed feel once again to make that version of himself, the clone, appear. And when he does appear, they both begin to train together on their speed, their technical ability, and so on and so forth. He tries to summon a second quirk on top of, or a second version of himself on top of that, but his clone quirk falls short and he's unable to do so. He falls to the ground and he basically is underneath the pier at this point. As he does this, he hears a voice from the side, a voice talking to a girl, a young girl, maybe around the age of Izuku, maybe a little bit older, and they begin to speak about it. They're talking about a second year at a high school that is basically preparing students, or basically students of UA, for the next generation and the next generation of heroes. And this person sounds familiar to Izuku, like he's heard him before. The voice continues to speak, saying that they're going to gift this person power that it's going to be extremely hard to maintain, so they're going to need to train extremely hard, but they should be ready. And they have capabilities beyond that they could possibly believe. This person, this female, this girl, is extremely intelligent. All Might says this and says that she'll find her way. She'll find her way relatively quickly, and she will surprise everybody. Izuku would then creep out a little bit to look who it is. Oh my god. That's All Might. Izuku would kind of have a panic attack as he steps out from beyond the pier, and he kind of waves. Hey, I overheard what you guys were talking about. I didn't mean to eavesdrop. I was actually running earlier and kind of was taking a break under the pier. And once he says this, they both kind of freak out, asking how much he actually heard, and Izuku says that he didn't hear enough to basically get them into any trouble, so not to worry. whatever secret they're hiding, he says that he doesn't know it. He promises that all he knows is that, well, the symbol of peace is training whatever her name is. She introduces herself. Her name is Melissa Shields, son of David Shield. And for what Izuku knows, well, David Shield is pretty famous, and his daughter is extremely intelligent, on the bridge of prodigy-like. Izuku is just shocked, extremely shocked. Why would someone like that's from America, come to Japan to train with All Might? Wow, that's something definitely crazy. Izuku says that it must feel like a privilege to train with someone as high tier as All Might, and Melissa agrees, saying that it is definitely a privilege, and she's going to take advantage of every moment she can. She's going to use the time they have here to become the best hero possible. She says that she's going to be going to UA as a second year, of course, because she actually is a little bit older than Izuku is. Izuku says that he'll be trying for UA, and that he'll be trying basically to get through the entrance exam. All Might looks at him once again and asks him something. Hey, are you the one that's ran away from the sludge villain? And Izuku is shocked and asks if he's in trouble, but All Might shakes his head. He says that it's actually impressive. He wanted to know what his quirk is, what is it like, and what did he do? Izuku explains it entirely and says that there's still aspects he doesn't understand, but at the same time, he's actually was able to do that clone, or make that version of his clone out of a whim, out of a need. And that's what he was able to do, and he was able to save himself. Well, luckily. And luckily enough, All Might was following close behind. Izuku smiles slightly, and All Might nods, saying that he's definitely equipped to get into UA, and he'd love for Melissa to have a training partner. And of course, this needs to be under wraps. He can't talk about it to anybody or anyone, maybe his mother, and that's about it. Izuku agrees, of course, and All Might says that not only that he'll get amazing training, he'll even recommend him for UA. Izuku is shocked. Wait, really? A recommendation from All Might? Izuku is completely taken back, and All Might says as long as he lives up to his end of the bargain, of course, and as long as he can, as long as All Might can see potential in the boy, he'll definitely recommend him, but he'll be brutally honest. Izuku says he wouldn't want anything less from someone of his caliber. He wants that criticism. He wants to get better. All Might smiles, and he knows this kid is dead serious. Izuku wants to get stronger. He wants to get more powerful. He wants to be able to be a great hero. So the training commences. Izuku uses versions of himself, or clones, one that has strength enhancement and the other that has a speed enhancement, or basically super speed, to help Melissa train on top of that. They do physical training and they do combat training and so on and so forth. Melissa even coming up with different inventions that she feels may help Izuku along the way or way later on in time. But these are just blueprint ideas. These aren't created. She doesn't have her lab or anything like that she can really do. And Izuku even questions if she's going to be part of the support course as well, in which she says, yes, it's going to be a lot of work, but for her to do both, it would be a great opportunity. Izuku thinks that's a fantastic idea. He wishes that he was intellectually inclined like her. It would be amazing. But unfortunately, he's not, which is fine. He doesn't really care. He is a pretty smart kid, and he has some good breakdowns in his notebook, in which Melissa definitely would compliment, but nowhere near Melissa's level. They're both nerds, but Melissa is just, twice the nerd, in a way. Izuku, though, would continue this training throughout the 10 months, and All Might sees potential in the boy. Insane potential. So he lives up to his end of the bargain, giving him that recommendation. And let's just say a recommendation from All Might just kind of gets you in for free. You don't need to take no tests. You don't need to do any of that. And Izuku even meets with the one and only Shota Aizawa, Eraserhead. Eraserhead would actually basically speak with Izuku back and forth a little bit, and even speak with Melissa. He definitely favors Melissa, but he can see how Izuku definitely caught the eye of All Might. Izuku makes his clones and is asked to do so, at least trying to make both of them, and he does actually pretty easily now after the ton of training he went through. And after doing that, Izuku actually watches as Aizawa activates his own quirk. And as he does this, it actually only works on one of them. It's weird. When he uses it on the real Izuku, it doesn't actually erase the other Izukus. It just erases the quirk that is within Izuku. So the clones are still there, but it's odd. It's as if it doesn't even affect Izuku at all. There's no point. And actually, it kind of does affect him. All it really does when he looks at the real Izuku is it cancels out the making of more clones. So if you catch Izuku with erasure before he can make a clone, he won't be able to make clones at all, which is definitely something to think about. But he would have to cancel the other one's quirks for it to actually matter. So Izuku would have to be ignored, or the main Izuku would. The one with the red eyes, it would get rid of his strength. The one with the yellow or the sparkly kind of electricity eyes would get rid of its speed. Aizawa is interested in this. Very unique quirk, and it's very interesting. He doesn't really pry on it too much, and he says that the training at UA will benefit him tenfold, including the training will definitely benefit Melissa as well. Aizawa makes it clear that he does want to have those two, Melissa and Izuku, continue training, because they will see benefits that nobody else will. The chemistry they've built, at least in terms of fighting together and actually basically sparring, it seems like it's perfect for Melissa. And at this point, Izuku would kind of get a bit of a grip on what Melissa's quirk is. At least the idea that it's a strength enhancement allows her to increase her speed by a lot, and being how smart Melissa is, when she gets one for all, which Izuku doesn't know it's one for all, he just knows that she has some sort of strength or speed enhancement quirk. She actually is pretty smart about the whole full cowling regard, being that she's already at 5 to 10% of full cowling, because, well, she would have already came up with this idea far before All Might or Izuku would even think about it. With that said, though, the first day of UA would eventually creep up and would eventually arrive. Melissa and Izuku would go their separate ways, but they would convene, or basically inconvene with each other every so often to make sure that they're up with their training and actually up with their sparring. Melissa would love to make support items for Izuku, and that's definitely something she'll be doing, making him a suit very similar to All Might's, but adjusted so that it could actually benefit his quirks, which she's still in the midst of working on. So there's going to be a bit of a prototype coming their way, but other than that, there is some things that Melissa is very excited about, and so is Izuku. On the first day of UA, Izuku would arrive, and when he would enter the room, he would actually immediately see Bakugo. But Bakugo would run over, saying that, well, how did he get in? He wasn't at the entrance exam, he wasn't anywhere. He must have cheated, he's a liar. He said he wasn't, or that he was going to UA, he didn't even show up, and now he's here? As Aizawa would arrive after all the students after, Bakugo would even point this out, saying how did a loser like him get in without even taking the entrance exam? Aizawa looks at him and looks at Izuku. Aizawa points toward Bakugo and tells him to sit down, shut up, and he'll tell him. Izuku sits down as well, and Aizawa quiets the whole class down. Look, I don't mean to put a target on your back, Mr. Midoriya, but if you really would like to know, Bakugo, if you really, really want to know, well, he was recommended. Bakugo would say, what kind of pro hero would recommend that loser? And Aizawa would smirk. The type of pro hero that's, well, it's the number one. All Might himself recommended that kid. Now, with that said, can you shut your damn mouth? As Aizawa says this, the whole class deafens. They're silent. Izuku doesn't say a word. It seems that Aizawa knew that at this point, it didn't really matter if they knew that that All Might recommended, and All Might wouldn't have gotten mad at Aizawa by any means. So, Izuku's not going to take a fall for this at all. Aizawa smirks slightly and says that they have some competition. It seems that All Might himself thinks that this guy right here is pretty talented. So, they're going to see how talented everyone else is. Aizawa says they're going to have a bit of a competition. They're going to basically go through a physical assessment, but this will be a quirk assessment, showing how strong each one of the quirks are and whose quirk is the strongest and who's the best. Izuku listens closely as Aizawa says that, but whoever gets last place will be expelled. They all think that they're all high and mighty now. They all think they're special, and that's all hero schools want to do is hype them up and think that they're just all this amazing and future of hero society. You're not the future. You'll have to get past me if you really want to make that a reality. Of course, Aizawa, as stern as always, makes this abundantly clear. If you want to be a pro hero, you got to get by him first. And if you want to be a top pro hero, well, you're gotta get ready to go through hell. With that said, this is where we're gonna end part 1. Izuku Midoriya gets ready for his quirk assessment. But this quirk assessment has a little bit more weight to it, especially because Shota Aizawa, other known as Eraserhead, has put a stipulation on it, that whoever gets last place actually gets expelled. Izuku would wait his turn and watch as Katsuki Bakugo would go up first. Bakugo, who actually got number 1 in the UA entrance exam, would get ready to throw a baseball. As he gets ready to launch this baseball, he activates his quirk and throws it as hard as possible. It goes flying, almost about 900 meters. Everyone is going crazy about it. Everyone thinks that's just amazing. That's insane. How are they going to compete with that? Izuku, not saying really a word at all, just watches as the other people go about their day as well. Even a girl throwing it to infinity. So it's not really crazy impressive that Bakugo was able to do such a thing. But eventually it was Izuku's turn. It was his turn to go up next. Izuku would make a clone of himself, the one with red eyes and one that had super strength. So he would walk up and everyone would be kind of shocked at what the quirk is, and someone actually questioned if that's technically cheating. Is it technically himself? That's not really himself, but this is a quirk assessment, and this is his clone quirk. So he walks up, or at least the clone of him walks up. As it grabs the ball, Izuku focuses all his energy into that said clone as he winds up and launches it. The ball goes soaring, and when I mean soaring, I mean soaring. It goes insanely far, about 1,500 meters. His super strength clone has gotten just tremendously stronger over the 10-month period, especially with training with the successor of All Might, or Melissa Shields. I mean, you would see insane benefits, especially from this, especially with training with someone else. Many in the class are in complete and utter awe, but Izuku just walks back in line and awaits the next event. The events would slowly but surely go on, and Izuku would show off a lot of his skills. On the grip strength, on the speed, on the side steps, anything you could really think about, Izuku would pretty excel in everything. And this would lead to him getting first place relatively easily. And it wouldn't really be a competition. He would just widely do extremely well on everything. He would get like 3rd, 4th place on the ball throw. He would get like 1st on the race and the side steps and stuff like that. And he would just do flat out insane things, which is kind of expected, ironically enough. Like I said, Izuku has success. Extreme success in this regard. The quirk assessment was a breeze. He would get first, and Invisible Girl, or Hagakure, would actually get last place. But of course Aizawa would expel her, but that next day we would see that she would be back and ready to go once again. When they arrived the next day, the next school day, Izuku would see that she is there. Aizawa basically says that he'll expel people how he sees fit, and as long as they understand the circumstances and the threat that is there, and that he can do whatever he wants to make sure that they turn out to be, well, perfect heroes, then they're fine. They're excellent. Izuku listens in as Aizawa explains more and more, eventually leading to actually hero training. Izuku knew about this already, and he awaits the arrival of All Might. All Might arrives busting through the door, saying his signature "I am here," and he explains that they'll all be doing hero training, and on top of that, they're going to be going and getting their hero outfits. Izuku would head out and would get the hero outfit that actually Melissa designed herself. Actually, these designs are based around his replication or his clone Quirk, allowing certain aspects to help the speed version of Izuku and the strength version of Izuku. And of course, there's going to be many more clones of Izuku to come, but those are all involving extreme stress on his body, extreme stamina drain, and also a lot of emotional creativity, you could say. With that said though, he gets on his hero outfit being very similar to the one in canon, but with far better basically technology and far better look. You could say it's like the one from that one movie, from that one My Hero Academia movie. It's that more advanced suit for Izuku, and there's so many more benefits to this suit, especially since Melissa had a good hand in making it. With that done, and with that said and done, and him all suited up and everyone else suited up as well, the heroes versus villains training is about to begin. All Might explains exactly what they'll be doing. The heroes would be in pairs, and they have to go seize the bomb within the building within a certain time frame. The villains need to basically take out the heroes, capture them, or avoid the bomb getting touched over a course of that same time period. And he begins to call out who will then go. He calls out Ochako Uraraka and Izuku Midoriya as the first as heroes, and the villains will be Katsuki Bakugo and Tenya Ida. Of course, him or Izuku and Ochako do not know each other at all. In this version, Ochako was never, helped by Izuku. Luckily enough, there was someone else there to help her, but that's a little bit beyond the point. Izuku, unfortunately, wasn't there to help, but since things got moved around and Izuku wasn't actually there, it actually bopped Bakugo down one, and Bakugo was luckily able to help the quote-unquote poor girl. But he will never admit that. Bakugo's just, not the type. He doesn't want the gratitude, but he also doesn't want people thinking that he's a nice guy. It's just going to annoy him. Now it's time for the heroes versus villains to start. Bakugo and Ida head up to the building, and Izuku and Ochako begin planning what they should do. Izuku brings up that the clones he has have different aspects. There's different versions of him. He's only able to control 2, but he explains it. And they begin to talk about certain ways that they should go about this, eventually deciding on a more tactical approach, you could say. And using the levitation quirk or the gravity quirk of Ochako, they're going to use that and the combination of both of Izuku's clones to basically scale the building. Once they scale the building, they'll start from the top and work their way down. They believe this to be the best way to approach it, especially with knowing Bakugo will most likely pursue Izuku for a fight. But before that fight could occur, Izuku would actually pull out contacts, giving small little glazed over contacts to his speed version of himself, making his eyes look slightly more green, just enough so that it can actually confuse Bakugo into thinking that that is the real Izuku. So when they head up to the very top, work their way down, and Bakugo finally finds them, the speed version of Izuku would arrive at the scene looking like the regular Izuku, and they would have their little fight. But this would give freedom for Izuku and the strength version of him, including Ochako Uraraka, to find where the bomb currently is. As they arrive, it's only Tenya Ida, and since they caught him before he could actually clear out the entirety of the room, there's actually a couple things for Ochako to utilize. But on top of that, Izuku is able to regain his speed version of himself, bringing him back to basically within Izuku, and they begin to have their assault on Tenya, eventually leading to them touching the bomb, relatively easy in fact. Because when he retracts the speed version of himself, he's able to make that speed version as well, and that speed version is arguably, actually probably clear, faster than Tenya, so it was pretty easy to actually, win. Izuku would hear the alarms go off after the win is made, and All Might begins to speak on the intercom, talking about how the hero team has won. They head back to All Might, and they hear little critiques here and there, but overall, Izuku and Ochako did very, very good, and Bakugo, he needs to work on his awareness. Knowing that Izuku had a clone quirk, he shouldn't have got sucked in that bad to a fight with Izuku. And all it took was a simple decoy, and it put him away entirely out of the battle. Izuku kind of chuckles at this, but Bakugo is pissed. Bakugo tells them that he's going to be better than all of them, and that they won't even stand a chance at keeping up. But of course, Izuku doesn't really mind any of these words that are being said, and he doesn't think much about it. After that day is over, he continues his training with Melissa, and they begin speaking about how school has been going so far and how she enjoys it. And she says that she enjoys it pretty much. She always thought that she would be over in America or on the island for the majority of her life, just inventing. But now that she has power like this, and that she awakened basically power like this, that she'll be able to take that next step into actually being both, helping as a hero and also helping as a support hero. In which Izuku kind of envies this, saying that is great, it's fantastic, it's something that he's definitely would have loved to do. In which actually Melissa does bring up something. She brings up the fact that he is intelligent on his own, but has he ever thought about any emotion that would lead to giving him some sort of hyper intelligence with one of his clones? Of course, Izuku hasn't thought about this at all. He's thought about the angry version of him, he's thought about the energetic or the excited version of him, but he hasn't really thought about anything else. The sad version of him, maybe something like that. Would that do something would that give him intelligence? Probably not. But there probably is some other emotions that would give it to him. What about the cocky version of himself? The overconfident version of himself? Well, that would probably fit the mold best, but he can't really do much about that at this moment. He needs more time to train and actually learn how to do that. He's quote unquote mastered these other two versions of himself, and he does think that he needs to go on to another version, but that's such a difficult process. He still needs time just recouping, and that process will take a long time. Melissa encourages him to basically try his hardest, to push himself beyond the limits that he possibly could, and that even herself, she has seen limits that have been broken because of Izuku, in which this does motivate Izuku a far bit, and they would get some more training time together until a couple days would pass, and Izuku would be introduced by Aizawa to rescue training. Everybody would be introduced to rescue training. The USJ is something that they all use, that UA uses and everyone else uses to prepare for a lot of situations. Aizawa explains this and says that the person there at the USJ will explain more, so they're going to hop on the bus and head over. So they hop on that said bus, they begin to head over to the USJ as they speak about who they believe to have the best quirk, in which it's really between Todoroki and Izuku, but also Bakugo as well. Bakugo is extremely powerful, and there is no reason to underrate him in that regard, but Izuku feels that he has the best quirk, most likely. I mean, think about it. There's a lot of scenarios that he could eventually come up with that would save a lot of people, and ironically enough, he might be a hero, but a rescue hero is something that he'll probably thrive at. He has a super strength version of himself that can carry things at insane weights. He has a speed version of himself that basically can save people at a blink of an eye. And soon he'll have more and more people like himself that are going to be able to do different jobs. And on top of that, it's multiple versions of himself. So they're going to have similar or the same powers as him. And on top of that, the additional quirk, of course. After a while of debating and talking and so on and so forth, the class was kind of split, but eventually they would arrive. Aizawa would tell them all to be quiet, and they would all head in to the USJ. But none of them would know. None of them would exactly know what they were in for. those steps, climbing those steps and opening those doors, and the greetings by Pro Hero 13, they had no idea that what was coming was something catastrophic, something that was terrifying. The USJ soon would be full of villains, but before that could even occur, Izuku would get this weird feeling, anxiety flushing over him, being terrified. It's weird. He's so anxious. Feels like his skin is crawling as if it's bubbling and he can't help but scratch his arms. Something is coming. As he does this and as he feels these things, well, let's just say he separates into someone and something that has purple eyes. It's himself with purple eyes. And that version of himself that is connected to the first Izuku, the one that has the clone Quirk, he can tell something's coming. As if he had some sort of psychic connection with the environment around him. This version of Izuku has some sort of psychic quirk. And he immediately turns toward Aizawa, telling him that something is coming. Something real bad. As he says this, and as that version of Izuku says this, he disappears as Izuku is not used to holding that version of himself up. Unable to keep him there, but the warning was good enough. Aizawa then basically sends somebody immediately out, being that of Tenya Ida, to escape before anybody else could even invade. He's told to run as fast as possible, as quick as possible. And he questions slightly why Izuku doesn't do it, but Izuku's clones cannot go as far as Tenya can. And Tenya just bolts off before any villains even arrive. But as the villains arrive, it's still going to be one hell of a challenge. Izuku watches as portals open, villains pour out, and they all stand in front, mocking the heroes. The students will now feel the wrath of the League of Villains, especially because All Might is not there. Izuku tries to ask Aizawa if he could help out, but Aizawa doesn't say a word, jumping into action. But before he could even know it, Izuku is sucked into a portal and put somewhere in the USJ. He's immediately in some water, and he uses the clone of the super quick or energetic clone to get himself out of it as they run up onto a boat before even Asui can react to help him. They look down to see that there are a ton of villains below. Izuku believes this is, well, not the best course of action, and they're kind of in a bad spot. He looks to his right to see Asui and his left to see a crying Mineta, and he questions and asks what they plan on doing and what they should do. Izuku says that he has a version of himself that is extremely fast, and they might be able to get some speed and have good distance if Asui can carry them the rest of the way. But the other question is really trying to get the other, people below to not follow them. Asui comes up with a small plan, and Izuku chimes in as well. They'll use that the speed version of his clone to get a good jump start. Once they do that, they'll switch to the strength version, and they will all grab onto Izuku, and Asui will wrap her tongue around all of them. As she does this, the strength version of Izuku will dive toward the water, slamming as hard as possible into the water to make some sort of whirlpool. Mineta will start throwing the balls on his head to stick them together and capitalize on the weaknesses that the people underneath them truly have, getting them stuck within the water and keeping them there the entirety of the fight. So the plan, they decide to go about it. Izuku's clone, or the clone with yellow eyes, sprints off as quick as possible and immediately gives them good distance within the air. Asui grabs onto them. The strength clone goes diving into the water, smashing into the water, creating a giant whirlpool, and they all get sucked into it. The plan went without a hitch, and they're able to get across the river or the pond relatively fast, and they're able to get into a position where they can hide out, at least for the moment. Izuku talks about they all need to meet up with their classmates and head back up to where Pro Hero 13 is. As they look over, they're very worried. Pro Hero 13 could be in a bad spot right now, so they need to get out and help. Asui brings up the fact that maybe Aizawa needs some help as well, and Izuku says that they will make sure to get over to where the students are or the rest of their classes, and Izuku will help with Aizawa. They question why him, and he says that he can stay a far enough distance that Aizawa won't have to worry about him. He'll only have to worry about the clones. The clones will be able to do most of the work. Izuku and everyone agrees, and they begin running up to the rest of their classmates to relative safety. But Izuku peels off, creating both of his clones once again, as it kind of tires him out. But luckily, he's in a spot where it doesn't necessarily matter. He can sit down and kind of hide within the grass or kind of weird environments so that he's not going to be seen. He sends out the speed version of him, and it begins to trailblaze back and forth, taking out a ton of the villains, and the strength version helps with some of the brutes that are currently there that are overwhelmingly strong. Not overwhelmingly strong for, well, Aizawa, but definitely can save him some energy by being able to put them down. Izuku's clones are able to clean up the mess that Aizawa basically started and be able to clean up the rest of the villains that are currently there, but these are just low tier villains that are really nothing really to really care about. These are villains that Aizawa could have beaten if he was given an extra couple minutes. But now the real challenge is here, and that is Shigaraki, the Nomu, and Kurogiri. Because once they see that giant monster coming out of that portal, the worry and the pit in their stomach drops, because this is an issue. All Might is currently not here. They don't have the raw strength to take this thing on, and frankly, most pro heroes don't have the raw strength to take this thing on. Izuku keeps his clones out there, and his speed clone or his energetic clone is able to bounce back and forth to help Aizawa and basically maintain any distance they possibly can and confuse the Nomu here and there. Of course, Shigaraki tells Kurogiri to find that kid wherever he is. They need to get the clones to stop. But of course, Izuku is relatively hidden and hidden relatively well, but they do bring up the fact that his clones have to have some distance decay. They have to be basically so far enough away, or he has to be close enough to the clones that they actually work. Izuku hears them kind of talk about this, and it worries him drastically because this could put them in a massively bad situation. So he decides that he's going to put everything in the hands of his clones here. He's going to dump out the rest of his energy right now, and he's going to hope for the best. As he focuses as hard as he possibly can, the clones disappear. It seems that his stamina has run out, and he no longer can help Aizawa. But as he believes his clones disappeared, and as he believes that, well, there is nothing there and he can't help, his hands begin to shake extremely fast. But there's a reason for this. He looks up to see a face that nobody would want to see. A bird-like creature with teeth terrifying. A creature that is so huge that it looks bigger than All Might himself. Izuku stares at the creature dead in its face as it hovers above him. Izuku looks at his hands as they twitch, speed up. They go faster and faster and faster until the Nomu tries to punch Izuku like a pancake, trying to squish him into the ground. But out of nowhere, Izuku's gone. He's where the students are. In an instant, Izuku was out of there. What happened? Who helped him? All of his classmates look at him in confusion. Some, like Kirishima and many others that just arrived once again, question why his eye color changed. And why does it keep changing? Izuku's confused, but then realizes something. He just used the super speed himself. He just, out of connection and out of complete stress and him needing it, he somehow connected with the clone and utilized its quirk slightly and just for a moment's notice. But as he realizes he does this, he can feel that his body is aching. His legs are injured, as if his body alone is not built for this quirk, which in a way would be true, because genetically, when he clones himself and he makes a different version with a different quirk, those genetics are altered. They're altered to fit that said quirk, not the clone quirk. So when he utilized that speed quirk and he utilized that energetic version of his quirk, that side of his clone quirk, it completely destroyed his legs, or at least to the point that they hurt like hell. He collapses on the ground, but he looks up and it seems that he gave Aizawa enough time to at least get to somewhat safety. But real safety would arrive right when the doors swing open and All Might is here. All Might comes barreling down, but he's not the only person there helping. All Might and Melissa have arrived. They go swinging toward the Nomu at insane speeds, smashing into the Nomu with a double Detroit smash. In an instant, the Nomu gets sent launching toward the back of the USJ. They both dash toward the Nomu, striking it straight up as it gets launched out of the USJ. They turn toward Shigaraki, and Shigaraki slightly smirks, but then at the same time has anger in his eyes. He's frustrated. Yeah, they might know or have a clue who the successor of All Might is, but does it matter when they're this far along? Is this going to put a hamper in their plans? He's pissed now. The overwhelming feeling of knowing something that they needed to know, but now it's all changing within his mind. They might know who the successor of All Might is, but does that matter when they're this far along? When the potential there seems to be greater than All Might? Frustration boils over, and Shigaraki charges forward toward All Might and Melissa, but Kurogiri knows better. Kurogiri warps them all out, and out of nowhere, they're back at the base of the League of Villains, waiting for a call from All For One. And when the call would arrive, All For One would tell them to stay calm and be ready, because the time is coming, and it will come. It may be later, and it might be not as soon, but the time of war and the time of getting what they want will come. They are playing the long game. As villains, that's what they must do. Back to where the heroes are currently, All Might and Melissa luckily have saved the day, have saved them all. And frankly, Izuku sitting there just happy that everything's okay. In raw strength, he would not have been able to keep up with that Nomu. Not one bit. He's just happy everything worked out for the best and that nobody truly got hurt. Melissa helps him up, and they all head out and go to Recovery Girl. Izuku has some recovering to do, but with the UA Sports Festival on the horizon after such a catastrophe that just occurred, we'll have to see how good Izuku is and see where his mind is when he goes in to the UA Sports Festival. Izuku Midoriya and the rest of his class arrive, in class. They begin waiting to hear what Aizawa has to say, eventually leading to Aizawa explaining exactly what's going to happen that said day, and that is the UA Sports Festival. The UA Sports Festival is a way for them to show off exactly what they've been through, what they can do, and so on and so forth. Izuku wants to show exactly what he could do. He hasn't really perfected much of anything, and that little bit of usage that he did a lot or during the USJ, he won't be able to pull that out right now. But utilizing his quirk and utilizing his clones, he'll be just fine in some of these USJ or this UA events. Izuku would arrive with his class as a cheering crowd would welcome them, and he would listen to the crowd and kind of get lost in it. His class would wait for a while until everybody else arrives as well, including the general studies, business, support, and so on. Izuku would see that Midnight would be hosting the UA Sports Festival and eventually would call up Katsuki Bakugo, the person who got number 1 in the entrance exam. Bakugo would walk up to the stage and begin to call out to everybody and would begin to say that he's going to win. And that's really it. Everyone's kind of shocked and kind of disappointed. There's no humbleness in Bakugo, so the people there aren't too happy with the way he responds, but still, he is the number 1 student in the entrance exam. With that said though, the first the first event would be announced to be the obstacle course race. And when this is announced, Izuku smiles widely because this should be easy enough. He has something that he can get a far lead with immediately in terms of his quirk, and he'll be able to sprint ahead almost instantaneously. So when everyone lines up and gets ready, Izuku immediately clones himself into his energetic version, or his very fast version, and he immediately basically hops on his back, and they sprint off at insane speeds when it's called that they're allowed to move. Izuku sprints through the corridor using his energetic version of himself, and they immediately are ahead by a large margin. Not many people even close to keeping up, Izuku being faster than practically everyone there at this moment, or at least his quirk being faster. So he races ahead of everyone, blasting through the competition, and immediately would arrive at the giant robots that actually he hasn't seen at all. Now, this isn't too big of a threat. He can just kind of slide under the robot's legs and kind of avoid them here and there. And honestly, he kind of runs around them to kind of get them tangled up so they begin to fall. And when they do, it actually does slow down everyone behind him once again. A bunch of the people that are very, very strong that are behind him actually realize that the gap that he's making, Izuku is making at this moment, is pretty substantial. So they need to hurry up. So Bakugo and Todoroki begin to put pedal to the metal, using their quirks to try and keep up to the best of their abilities. Of course, Izuku's speed is only temporary in technicality, because he's gonna eventually wear out and not be able to use his clone. But the thing is he had a lot of training with utilizing this clone, so it's not gonna disappear how it once did. And maintaining a relatively basic speed will allow him to conserve energy for the upcoming battles as well. So when he gets to the type ropes, it's relatively easy to actually just run across the ropes using his energetic version of himself, because frankly the speed itself would allow him to not really have to worry about the ropes and kind of just be able to clear the gaps. So he does that relatively quickly, and eventually he would arrive at the minefield. And now this is where the issue kind of lies. And this issue would be that he doesn't want to just sprint through this because it could become definitely detrimental. So he decides he's going to try something else. Try something that he actually hasn't done since the USJ. He's going to use his different version of himself, a version of himself that is based on a sad or kind of sad emotion, and it would allow him to kind of sense where everything is, being that this version of himself is a psychic type quirk. And let's just say it won't last very long, so Izuku has to utilize what he can tell from his clone as best as he possibly can. When he clones himself into this sad version of himself, it does take a moment to get the words out of him, because I mean, obviously the emotions have an effect on what Izuku does, but the psychic version of himself clears a perfect pathway for Izuku, and he just casually runs through that pathway, eventually leading to about, I would say, 95% through the minefield. That clone would disappear, and Izuku would kind of sigh and be kind of annoyed, because he's not able to hold or withhold that version of himself for very long without draining a stupid amount of stamina, because frankly he just doesn't know how to utilize it properly at the moment. So he clears the rest of the minefield on his own, but he does step on a mine or two, which unfortunately kind of sends him flying, to the side or whatever. But luckily enough, he's fine, and he makes it all the way through, and he'd finish the obstacle course race as not only first, but he would just jog the rest of the way through because of the advantage he had over everybody and how far ahead he truly was. Now, of course, Bakugo and Todoroki would make their efforts to try their best to catch up, but catching up really wasn't an option after a certain point, so Izuku would be number one. Now, there are some disadvantages for being number one, and that would be revealed with the next event, and that's the cavalry battle. Midnight would announce that the cavalry battle involves a group of students, and more like maybe 4 students, and more or less, they would basically act as a horse in a way. The one student would be on top, and there would be headbands. All the students would have headbands. But here's the instance, or here's the problem with that, is that the person who gets first is actually the person that will have a 1 million point headband. Now, it doesn't matter if you have this headband at the very end of the game, or if you have it in general, because whoever does have it would just auto win, because there's no real reason to even attack this person, quote unquote, if you just allow them to keep the headband and they automatically win, or at least get first place. You could easily rack up points from other students and win relatively easily. But at the same time, many of these students are extremely competitive, including people like Bakugo and Todoroki, so having the 1 or 10 million point headband would put a massive target on your back, and Izuku would find that out relatively quickly. He would build a decent team of Tokiyami and some other people, actually including Mei Hatsume as well, because he's heard about her genius, more or less, inventions from Melissa throughout this time. So he would build a pretty good team, and with his clones and the allowance of a Quirk, technically this isn't him touching the ground. So it's as if he has more bodyguards. He makes the angry version of himself basically bodyguard them throughout this time, and it's relatively easy to fend off anybody because, well, Izuku has full control over his clone that's on the ground with no responsibilities. So he's able to fend off everybody relatively easily, including if he needs a little bit of a speed boost, he summons or he clones his speed version of himself, or the energetic version of himself, that could get him out of harm's way relatively quickly. Defense is something that they were perfect at, and defense is something that they had a good time doing, because they would keep their 10 million point headband or 1 million point headband, and they would be first in the cavalry battle as well, in which it was pretty easy. I don't really need to get into any complicated details on the reason why. All quirks are allowed, so the fact that he has a clone quirk is very convenient for this especially. And it'll be very convenient for the next battle as well, being that of the 1 versus 1 battles, or just, 1v1s. In which there's a little bit of an issue with that 1v1 type of tournaments, and that's because the first person he'll go against is Shinso. And Shinso's quirk is relatively unknown to Izuku and unknown to many others, but he does get a little bit of a hint from one of his classmates about what Shinso's quirk kind of does. And that's when he talked or answered a question, it seemed that he got put in a trance, as if he could no longer control his movements and no longer could control anything. In which Izuku takes this information to heart because he doesn't want to just throw away his chance at winning, especially with just how Shinso's quirk works, and also how the information he just got. So when it's his turn and Midnight calls up Shinso and Izuku Midoriya, well, he's ready for whatever's to come, and he kind of feels bad though. In a way, he really does. He summons or he clones his energetic version of himself, and he thinks about just immediately eliminating Shinso. Shinso begins to talk and basically saying this or that, or basically in a way complimenting Izuku, asking him how it feels to have such an amazing quirk, and Izuku shakes his head. His energetic version of himself charges forward at Shinso and, well, grabs onto him and is about to push him off, but out of nowhere, the energetic version of him just declones, disappears, and Izuku begins to stand still, in which Shinso is confused, very confused. What is happening? Hey, you alright? Shinso would ask Izuku, and this time it's not even because he's trying to put him in a trance, he's genuinely confused. Izuku shakes his head, and he begins to think, this guy right here, he's gone through not only the obstacle course race, but also the cavalry battle, getting to this point as a general studies student, and he didn't even get a chance, not even one chance, to become a hero, or at least be in the hero class. Izuku feels kind of bad for him, especially with Izuku's eyes opening to the fact that he's kind of been blessed. Frankly, he's been extremely lucky on all fields of imagination. He's been trained by All Might. He's training with All Might's successor. Yeah, he doesn't know that Melissa technically, has one for all, because, he didn't really think that far ahead, but he can make his own assumptions. But on top of that, he's had such a blessing throughout this time. His quirk itself is in a way a blessing. Shinso got the short end of the stick. His quirk is amazing, great. It may seem villainous to some, but it's a fantastic quirk. But just because of the way UA is set up, he wasn't able to even get in. He wasn't able to do anything. He can't get into the hero school, so he went to the general studies to try to beat someone out. Izuku low-key kind of feels bad. He doesn't want to throw away this chance, or basically throw away this chance for himself, but also doesn't want to throw away the chance for Shinso. So Izuku decides to answer a question, in which Shinso's confused. It seems like he answers the most simple question. He tells Shinso that he's fine. He's just fine. And as he does this, Shinso activates his quirk, and he doesn't even smile. He's confused. It was obvious that Izuku knew what his quirk worked, or how it worked, and everyone in the stands are confused as well. Why did he do that? Or at least Class 1A is confused because he knew how his quirk worked. Izuku would eventually be told to walk off the stage, in which he does. And Izuku Midoriya loses in the first round of the 1 vs. 1s. And after the fact, Shinso walks over to him and asks why he would do something like that. That he didn't want his pity, and he wanted to just win. Izuku shakes his head and says that he's been blessed throughout this entire time. He's correct. With his quirk, with everything that he's done so far, with the training, the people that have trained him. So it's time that someone else gets the chance as well, especially with a quirk like his. Izuku nods towards Shinso, telling him that he has a chance to be just as good, if not better, than everyone here as a hero. And he hopes that he can take that chance, and hopefully he can get by, with trying to beat some of these other people. But it's going to have to be more than just using his quirk. He's going to have to get real creative. Izuku walks away and kind of waves him off. But of course, not the entirety of Class 1A actually know about Shinso's quirk. It was basically just a couple of people. They only told Izuku because that was his next up fight, so who says that Todoroki would actually know coming in? And maybe, just maybe, Todoroki would still beat Shinso, but the fact that he was able to take down someone recommended by All Might would get a lot of eyes. On top of that would get the eyes of Aizawa wanting to train him far immediately at that, and on top of that, other schools and other agencies or internships are basically paying attention to Shinso now. So when he goes in to fight Todoroki, he may get obliterated, and he might more or less lose instantly, but still, it's something that Shinso will benefit from in the near future. Todoroki, on the other hand, unfortunately will not use his fire. But when he would get to Bakugo and be egged on to use that said fire, and Izuku even from the stands is encouraging the use of it, it does implant in his brain that idea that maybe he should, or maybe he should try, because it is his quirk at the end of the day. But in this tournament, he wouldn't use it, but the idea of him using it would be within his brain. With the UA Sports Festival now wrapped up, and everything to a close, Izuku goes and speaks with All Might and Melissa. All Might brings up the fact that it was pretty honorable of Izuku to do such a thing, even if it gave Shinso just a glimpse more of a chance to become the hero he wants to be. On top of that, Izuku really didn't need it. I mean, he has the recommendation of All Might. Many people know who he is now, and frankly, there's a lot of places he could go. But there is one place he would recommend, and the same thing he's recommended to Melissa, and that's going with Gran Torino. Since both of them have trained together and have seen their benefits go upwards and outwards, it's definitely a good idea for them to kind of stick together in a way. Melissa will be taking on an internship as well. Same thing with Izuku. So if they both head to Gran Torino and they get some practice and some training in from one of All Might's old masters, then it should be definitely beneficial. All Might is saying this all while shaking like a literal scared person or a scared little kid sitting in the dark, which is definitely an odd thing to see a giant man like him do, but I guess it's scary to talk about your old master. I don't know. But nonetheless, Izuku and Melissa would agree on doing such a thing because, I mean, for one, they've had some really high progress in terms of their training together, and that will continue on as long as they continue to keep training together. So after a day would pass, a car would pick them up and bring them to Gran Torino's place, in which when they would open the door, he would act as if he's dead. Well, you know, with the whole ketchup on the ground thing. Izuku would immediately realize the guy's not dead. He's just playing a role, in which it is kind of funny, but Izuku tells him to just get up and that they have work to do. And Gran Torino gets up and kind of smiles and says that he likes the kid. It seems like both of them seem to be really on their gears and on their grind when it comes to, well, involving training. That's what they want to do, and that's what they're going to do. And Gran Torino knows exactly about Izuku's quirk and how to get it better, so they're going to work on that with Melissa on top of it as well. Izuku and Melissa would begin their training, Izuku beginning to utilize his energetic form and also his anger form as much as possible, and trying to link it back to himself. Izuku has shown this in the USJ, and he wants to try and master that. If he can somehow get his energetic form within his own, the energetic form's quirk within himself, it could become beneficial for his own preservation, especially because they don't want Izuku to be a liability and be attacked. So when he uses his energetic form, he tries to fully fill out his quirk entirely, feel how the energetic form feels, how the speed quirk feels, and how his body changes with that energetic form. Izuku focuses hard on this and tries to continue to mold his body into different ways, and sees and tries to figure out if he can truly do that. And this would be a form of his clone quirk, a form of his clone quirk, but it's more within his body, changing his body parts and his organs and everything to fit that said quirk. Like I said before, his speed quirk that he used at one time on accident hurt him extremely bad because his skin, his body, everything, his limbs were not based around that speed quirk. So he's trying to basically limit himself, or basically change himself and clone those different versions of his body within himself so that he can maintain properly, in which is an extremely hard thing to do. We're talking about Izuku utilizing multiple quirks here. We're talking about him using a clone quirk, but on top of that using a speed quirk on top of that. And it's something that he'll have to work on throughout this time immensely, but he does get some work in with it, and he's able to utilize the speed quirk a little bit, and is able to use the strength quirk separately, of course, a little bit as well. This does help with training, by far would help with training, because this would be basically more utilization for Izuku, and frankly, his clones aren't as adaptive as, well, himself. It might sound weird, but it is kind of like a different subconscious. So he's not able to react and basically act as quick as he would if it was his own quirk or within his own body. So it does help a great deal. After some time of training, eventually Gran Torino would want them to get some time in the field. And in the field is something that's, well, he'll regret just a little bit. Because when they begin to take basically a trolley all the way there, immediately the trolley would be smashed into by a Nomu. Of course, Gran Torino was on top of it, kicking the Nomu in the face, sending it flying out, and he tells Melissa and Izuku to follow him in and to make sure that everyone here is safe first, and then meet him in Hosu City, because they need to be able to evacuate as many people as possible. that's what needs to be done. And with Izuku there, and with clones, he should be able to actually do that pretty quickly. Izuku helps everyone else as Melissa does the same, and as they sprint off into Hosu City to meet up with Gran Torino. Izuku would begin to use clones to help people escape and also defend people from Nomu attacks, these Nomus being far, far weaker, frankly, than the Nomu he even faced or saw initially in the beginning. But still, these Nomus still are pretty strong nonetheless, so he wants to keep his distance to the best of his ability. But during this time, Izuku would save a lot of people, but for some reason, he would get this bad feeling. His eyes would flash purple, and something around him was happening. And they would continue to flash purple more and more and more until he sees something. A flash of Tenya Ida in a nearby alleyway. He immediately, his eyes turn yellow and he sprints off as if it was just a flash of lights. Melissa immediately races off to catch him because it has to be something bad. Something has to be happening for him to just leave without a word. Melissa goes soaring past and Gran Torino asks what's going on, and Melissa waves to him as if she's asking for backup very soon and to follow their trail. Gran Torino, not knowing what's happening exactly, but knows that these kids are extremely intelligent and frankly extremely smart, that he needs to keep up and help out here and get to them as soon as possible. Because when Izuku arrives right before Melissa would, as she catches up a couple seconds later, Izuku would see someone in an alleyway and see Tenya Ida on the ground with a bloody body to the right. Hero named Native is basically on death's door, and Tenya Ida is about to have a sword plunged into his back. Izuku charges forward and kicks the hero killer off of Tenya, and he tells Tenya to basically get out of there as soon as possible. But Tenya says he can't move. Izuku makes a clone, and immediately his energetic form, as he drops out of it as well, because he can't hold, well, both. The clone of himself grabs Tenya and races him off to safety. Izuku just puts Tenya on a nearby street that he knows will be safe, and the hero killer begins to shake his head, saying that heroes, well, fake ones, need to die and need to be punished, just like that one over there, a student that was coming for revenge. Izuku shakes his head, and Melissa stands next to him ready for a fight. She asks Izuku if he's really prepared for this, and that if he has enough stamina to withhold any clones or utilize quirks himself, in which Izuku says he'll be just fine, that their training will be put on full display as they take down the hero killer, Stain. Izuku Midoriya and Melissa Shields stand right in front of the hero killer. The hero killer kind of mocks them, saying that there is no beating him in this scenario, and that all of these heroes, well, they're kind of all fake. There's very few that are truly worthy of the title of hero, and he'll prove that to be 100% true right here. He hates to have to end the career of a hero before it even started, aka, well, end the life of the students there. But, well, it's kind of the issue of Tenya Ida. Tenya Ida brought this upon himself, and frankly, the hero killer feels that maybe all of them are like Tenya. With that said, though, the hero killer would begin blitzing forward, charging at Izuku and charging to have a fight. Izuku would immediately clone himself. Izuku knows that there's some sort of reason why Tenya was easily defeated by the hero killer, so keeping his distance will definitely become of the benefit of both Melissa and himself. Using his clones, he should be able to utilize that distance relatively well. He uses his energetic clone or his speed clone as much as possible, because at the end of the day, yes, he has a strength clone, but if he utilizes this speed clone, it seems that Stain will not be able to keep up. Of course, though, he would add his strength clone here and there, where the strength clone can hopefully do some substantial damage. But with Melissa also being there to help, it makes this fight far easier than it would have been with just Izuku. He makes it so that, well, him and Melissa have insane synergy. So the synergy would be extremely beneficial against Stain himself. But eventually he would be able to cut one of Izuku's clones, and he would lick the blood of Izuku's clone. Izuku would be confused, thinking immediately though that that must be some sort of quirk, maybe some reason why, or there must be some reason why he just did that. But when he does it, Stain looks confused, because Izuku's clone can still move. Izuku is also confused, looking at Stain oddly, because he didn't think the one that would be known as the hero killer would, well, kind of be at a loss for words at a sudden occurrence. Izuku and Melissa take advantage of this though, allowing both of them to get the upper hand, and frankly, the upper hand wouldn't be too far from just normal, because Melissa has a really high output of One For All, and on top of that, Izuku has pretty darn good control over his clones, being that his speed clone is going to be far faster than Stain himself. So when they're able to capture Stain, wrap him up in rope, and Izuku and his strength clone make sure that he stays completely still. After a little bit would pass, reinforcements would arrive, and frankly would arrive a lot sooner than normal. And the reason for this was because Izuku and Melissa actually helped out with evacuation before all of this even occurred. So it actually helped out in the overall grand scheme of things. So it allowed Endeavor and Gran Torino to arrive relatively quickly. So when they do arrive, the idea that, well, you know, Izuku and Melissa can't necessarily take credit for what occurred, because of the fact that they're still not full-fledged heroes, and they don't even have a provisional hero license. And Melissa, yeah, she's going to be getting it far sooner than Izuku will, but she still hasn't gotten it. So that is definitely something that they need to get around. Endeavor offers the fact that he'll just take credit for it, in which Izuku kind of sits uneasy about, but he still just, you know, deals with it at the end of the day, because he knows Endeavor is not the best of people in the overall grand scheme of things. Eventually though, he would see Todoroki arrive, which would make Izuku slightly happy, seeing that he not necessarily settled his annoyance with his father or his hatred, but at least he's utilizing the number 2 hero's, well, arsenal and knowledge to his own advantage. Izuku believes that Todoroki should learn as much as possible and gain strength as much as possible, especially after seeing what occurred and what happened. There is some time that is spent, well, outside of school. Of course, Izuku and Melissa are slightly in trouble for what they did, but they saw what they needed to do, and they see fit in terms of that regard. Izuku and Melissa would head back to school and go their separate ways once again, but Melissa would give Izuku a couple gifts based on some support items she's been working on. Just stuff that would allow him to more or less utilize the quirks that he currently has, and also utilize this new quirk that has arrived. Both Melissa and Izuku have been working extremely hard for a while now, actually, and the fact that he's had such progression has to be contributed to both All Might and Melissa to a large extent. Well, we'll have to see how big that progression is, especially in the next upcoming event. It's not necessarily the most insane thing, but the next event is the final exam. The final exam would show off exactly what they've learned and how far they have come. Aizawa explains that they will be going to a forest training camp afterwards, but the only way they'll be allowed to go and leave is if they pass the final exam, both the written and the practical. The written portion of the exam for Izuku won't be necessarily too difficult. He'll have to study a decent amount, but when you have someone like Melissa and many other people that are extremely intelligent to help out and help study, it's not too difficult in the grand scheme of things. So he's able to easily pass that exam, but the practical is where things get a little bit difficult, for the fact that the opponent that he's going against, and maybe even worse, the partner he'll be with is going to make things a good bit challenging. When they all arrive at the gym and they get ready for that said final practical exam, well, let's just say Izuku and Bakugo are the last to be picked, and they'll be going against the one and only All Might. All Might arrives and does his signature "I am here," and he signals that he will be their opponent. Two people that have not really gotten along at all by any means, and you can tell that Bakugo is extremely jealous of Izuku, but nonetheless, they're going to have to team up and fight together. Of course, though, Bakugo does not like this idea at all, and all the planning that Izuku wants to do and thinks he should do basically all goes down the drain. And it's all because of Bakugo. Bakugo still hasn't had a leap of character development, and he still does not care for Izuku at all. He believes that he can beat All Might on his own, and that's how he needs to do it, and that's how he wants to do it, and that's how he will do it. He will beat All Might on his own. He doesn't need the help of this idiot. He doesn't need help from this wannabe. So-called, oh yeah, he's trained with All Might, recommended by him. Yeah, sure. All Might really took a liking to him instead of Bakugo. That's how he feels about it, and that's why he doesn't want to listen to this damn nerd. They would wait until it's their turn, and when it is their turn to face down All Might, the restrictions that All Might have seem to be kind of non-existent. What's the point of putting weights on when they're so minuscule for someone like All Might? It literally doesn't matter. The gates would swing open, and Bakugo would shove Izuku to the side and charge forward toward All Might. Izuku would light up his eyes a yellow to catch up to Bakugo and begins to sprint extremely fast. Utilizing his quirk in this way, like I said before, does basically get rid of a lot of stamina. But if he uses it properly and uses it conservatively, then he'll be just fine. He races off with Bakugo and eventually arriving at All Might as a shockwave and a blast of wind gets sent toward them. They're able to dodge it relatively easily though, and Izuku continues to close the distance toward All Might. His eyes begin to flicker, and as his speed slows down, his body momentum continues as his eyes turn red, landing one single punch with super strength and at the momentum of super speed straight to the stomach of All Might. The punch itself sends All Might backwards about 20 meters. Bakugo would follow up with a strong blast to the face, but then turns to Izuku, shooting a blast toward him, launching him toward a building. Bakugo said he wanted to do this on his own, and that's what he's going to do. He continues to try and blast All Might over and over and over again. But Bakugo doesn't realize that All Might actually is feeling a little bit of the effects of Izuku's punch. That punch to the stomach hurt like hell. With the momentum and the super strength, and frankly, the combination of the two, Izuku made one hell of a combination, one hell of a combo. And this did drain a good bit of his stamina, but he's still able to make a clone or two, making a super strength and a super speed clone to hopefully go help Bakugo out right now. They go sprinting over there, and the super strength clone gets picked up by the super speed clone, and they begin to close that distance. When they arrive, they begin to try and fight against All Might with Bakugo, but Bakugo refuses this, blasting them away as well. Izuku makes them all disappear, thinking that it's just a waste of stamina if Bakugo continues to do that. He struggles to his feet as he walks over toward All Might and Bakugo, and he feels that Bakugo just won't listen. He won't listen at all. What is he supposed to do? Izuku shakes his head and frustratingly grabs Bakugo and grabs him quickly, grabbing him by the arm. Bakugo gets pissed and blasts Izuku in the side of the face, leaving a partial burn on his cheek, in which Izuku gets frustrated as he punches Bakugo in the back of the head so hard that he gets knocked out. Izuku's eyes flash yellow once again, but this time out of just pure anger, the electricity on his body turns red, and he dashes out faster than anybody could even see, and they cross the quote-unquote escape line, both of them escaping. And frankly, this would be the best idea to go about. Aizawa would walk up and ask if Bakugo's okay, and Izuku shakes his head yes, that he is. He's just fine. But he had to do that. There was no other way around it. He was just going to sabotage them and sabotage themselves. He had to eliminate a threat, ironically enough. Aizawa nods and says that that was a good course of action. That's what needed to be done, at least right now. Aizawa says he'll talk to Bakugo and he'll handle whatever needs to be handled, but there will be some punishment on Bakugo's regard. After some time would pass, Aizawa would explain to the class that everyone's going to the forest training camp no matter what. But if you did not pass the final exam, then you will actually have to take extra courses or extra classes over there. The next day, they would all head off to the forest training camp, and Izuku would be looking forward to trying to utilize his quirk in new and brand new ways. And when they arrive at a near cliffside, let's just say a quirk that he hasn't used much so far basically kind of cues him into what they're about to do. A clone of himself would appear, and with purple eyes, he would look very gloomy and sad and would begin to be very anxious at the same time. And Izuku can't really wrap his head around what version of him it is. I mean, I guess kind of him being anxious and sad are relatively similar, but he seems more anxious than anything. Maybe anxiety Izuku? He's not so sure. But it seems like it's trying to warn him of something, and then it disappears. Izuku believes that utilizing this version of himself will practically be useless because, well, he has anxiety, and it will just disappear every time something really, really big would conflict. And Izuku doesn't know how to get it to stay anyways, so not much they can do. Aizawa would slightly chuckle at the fact that that version of Izuku appeared, and Izuku just looks at him and shakes his head, knowing what's to come. Yes, they would meet the Wild Pussycats, and, well, Izuku would nerd out for a second, but they would get all thrown off that mountain so fast that their head would spin. So when they land on the ground, they had to fight through a ton of these monsters, these creatures, these mountainous creatures, whatever they are, the rock-made, earth-made creatures, and they had to fight all through them. And Izuku does make it a far bit easier because it's like you have multiple people on your side, about 3 of them. But other than that, it still takes them a good amount of time to arrive at the forest training camp. And when they do, they don't really got time to do anything else. That was kind of like their training for the day. Aizawa would explain that, and they would eat, get ready, go to sleep, stuff like that. And the next day is when the real training would begin. Aizawa would explain to all of them exactly what they need to do, and every single one of them needs to work on their quirk. He tells them that their quirk progression has been quite halted. They haven't really worked on the physical aspects of it, and obviously Izuku believes that to be very true as well. He's worked on that on his own, but it's still extremely difficult to do a couple things. And making more clones, including duplicates of ones with the quirks that he can already control, is something Aizawa needs him to work on. I mean, that's a lot of benefit. There's going to be a lot of benefit. And Izuku has thought of this before, but it actually is very strenuous on his body. It's for the fact that he's basically duplicating the same exact thing twice. He's never done that. He's only done similar. And in a way, doing different is actually better for him. Doing a full replica and an exact clone, very similar to replicating it within his own body, is extremely hard and extremely straining on his body. So that's why he hasn't really done it much, but if he does get used to it and he continues to get used to it, it could see insane benefits. And Izuku knows that. Izuku really does, and Aizawa seems to believe that to be so as well. After a couple days of training though, something would happen. Something would occur. Something that would set the world, or the country of Japan, on fire. And that's the kidnapping of Katsuki Bakugo. Katsuki Bakugo, let's just say, didn't have the best attitude after Izuku forfeited the UA Sports Festival. He wanted to fight him, to prove that he was the best, to prove that he was so much better than Izuku. So when that is shown on live television, some villains believe that there's susceptible kids, at least there's a susceptible kid right in front of them. Izuku didn't know this would occur, but the anxious and anxiety-filled version of himself would give him a bit of a heads up. Giving that heads up to the League of Villains invading, it did help, and it does help. But at the same time, Izuku is in a bit of an odd situation. He sends out clones to help protect everyone. Clones to even save Kota, who was going to be killed by Muscular. But luckily enough, able to save him, but not defeat Muscular at that. But Muscular would be defeated by heroes eventually, and probably by the help of Izuku on top of that. But still, after all that is done, there was no protecting Bakugo long enough, and Bakugo was taken by the League of Villains. Now that is something terrifying, because is Bakugo going to go to the side of the villains? After the things he's seen, after the things he's gone through, would Bakugo dare betray the heroes that have been training him and have been treating him like a future hero to come? Well, you're gonna have to find out what Bakugo's choice is in the next episode or the next part, when the League of Villains tries to entice Bakugo to join them on their escapade of conquering Japan. Izuku Midoriya is in a weird spot now, especially with his class. Aizawa has just lost a student, Katsuki Bakugo, and he's currently captured by the LOV. The League of Villains is a notorious group, and they've already dealt with them once, even twice, just not all together that separate occasion. But the real worry is if Katsuki Bakugo is going to turn. Izuku doesn't know. He's not sure. He remembers when he was a kid. They were practically best friends. Or maybe that was Izuku's delusional mind telling him that they were best friends. But still, he's a friend of Izuku. Izuku takes this to heart. The fact that his former best friend got kidnapped, someone that he's been rivals with so far, someone that's maybe he hasn't liked him very much, but still, it's somebody that he respects to a certain extent, somebody that needs to be a hero. There's no way Bakugo would turn, right? Izuku doesn't know, but with the occurrence that just happened, they begin to leave. They begin to head back to UA, or some of them would be immediately rushed to the hospital. This was a bit of a, bad invasion. An invasion of the forest training camp was something that wasn't exactly foreseen, at least not entirely. So it put them in an odd situation. With that said, though, they all begin to prepare, and they all begin to get ready. Well, more like Izuku begins to get ready. Because one night he would go over to where Momo Yaoyorozu is, and he would ask for an extra tracker. A tracker that would lead him straight to where he needs to be, straight to save Bakugo. Now, Momo doesn't want to give him this, but Izuku makes it adamant that he'll send clones, he'll be just fine. It'll be as if it was a scouting mission. Their training will be exactly what it needs to be. Izuku will set himself up for success, exactly what needs to happen. He promises he'll be safe. There's nothing that he's going to do that would be reckless. Momo would be inclined to believe him, and frankly his quirk is suited for a recon mission itself, so Izuku would get a tracker and would get that monitor, and he would eventually converge on the location of where Bakugo is. But during this time, he would wait, because he would see heroes begin to more or less invade that said building. When they would invade, an explosion can be heard from inside, and then multiple could be heard as well. Izuku is confused at what's occurring. Was that Bakugo fighting back against the heroes, or was that him fighting against the villains? He's not so sure. He can hope for the best, but eventually everything would clear up, but then everything would go right down the drain in a matter of minutes. Bakugo and so many others in the LOV would be transported to a new location in which not too far away from Izuku. Izuku would head over there as the heroes are completely and utterly preoccupied with a bunch of the other Nomus and so on. Izuku sees this being floating in the air and Bakugo surrounded by the League of Villains. Bakugo seems to be fending himself off, which certifies the idea that he did not go over to the bad side of things. Izuku is happy to see this, but he needs to be able to converge on the location of Bakugo and get him out of there. Izuku would send a speed version of himself going racing through the crowd, as the speed version of Izuku would smash into one of the villains and also hit another one right in the face. Shigaraki would be shocked to see this, as another speed clone of Izuku would come from the other side, kicking more and more of the villains away, as a third grabs Bakugo and races him off. Izuku smirks slightly to think that he got away with it, but just as he thinks so, tendrils begin getting sent toward exactly where Izuku is. The tendrils smash into the wall Izuku is hiding behind and penetrates through the side of Izuku. Izuku gets pulled through that said wall and gets sent flying toward All For One. All Might just arrives on the scene as he sees Izuku stuck in the air with All For One sitting right there, or standing right there with Izuku at the neck. Izuku is struggling to escape. His eyes begin to flash different colors, strength version, as he smashes into the arm of All For One, but he can't escape, not enough. He hurts All For One's arm and he continues to pound on it, but nothing occurs. His eyes begin to flash yellow as he tries to speed out of it, but that doesn't work as well. His eyes begin to flash multiple colors, more and more and more. Yellow, red, blue, purple, green. Everything that he has, everything that is happening. But slowly, Izuku is fading. Breath is getting hard or harder. Oxygen not being able to be intaked. Izuku can't breathe. And the lights are getting dimmer and dimmer and dimmer. But just as he's about to pass out, his eyes begin to shift to a shade of white as he falls through All For One's hand. All For One is completely shocked, completely in awe. How did that? Just as he's about to contemplate how Izuku did that, All Might punches him right in the jaw so hard it sends him flying to the ground. All Might runs over and catches Izuku, asking if he's okay, but his eyes are still white. Izuku begins to fall through the ground as if he's some sort of ghost. Now this, with what's happening, All Might's confused. What's going on? Is he dead? Everyone that's there currently is shocked to see, for one, Izuku there, but the fact that he just transparently, fell through the ground. How is that even possible? Izuku continues to fall further and further and further. He's headed toward the core of the earth, but it seems like his body is limp. There's nothing there. But out of nowhere, his eyes begin to transform once again. That white color changes rapidly. All the colors you could possibly think of, every emotion, every dial. Izuku's eyes then stop once again on white. A pure white, as if you could see through him itself. He flies straight up from the ground, and as he does, and as he comes out of the ground, a bunch of clones do as well. They begin pouring out from the left and right side of Izuku. Ones with yellow eyes, some with red eyes, some with purple, with blue, with light blue, with any color you can think of, all varying in different quirks. All for One looks up in complete and utter shock. What the hell is this kid? Izuku still, the main Izuku still with that white, deep white colored eyes, seems to be completely gone at this moment. It seems he's lost all sense of reality at this point. And it seems like Izuku has created his last stand. Now this is the Quirk Clone Parade. Something that Izuku had no idea he can do, and something that opens the eyes of All for One and believes that he might need this kid to take over everything. But the plan that he set up before this did not have this in mind. Izuku's clones begin to overwhelm All for One on top of All Might, absolutely taking the advantage over. The League of Villains are in cahoots to escape using a portal All for One makes, but even Izuku's clones, the piles of them, refuse to let them go, capturing them and knocking them out cold. Izuku's speed clones race them off to Tartarus, basically to get them in prison as soon as possible. All for One can feel everything collapsing. Everything that he built is going to fail. He sends tendrils at all the clones at Izuku, trying to kill them all. And as he does, they do poof out of existence and they do destroy. But for some reason, it feels like the advantage already has been lost, and that this fight is over. All Might lands his very last United States a smash, sending All for One to the ground with a cracked mask. Izuku then watches as one of his unique clones entraps All for One in some sort of barrier, forcing him still and unable to move entirely. A move that would allow All for One, or force All for One, to not be able to do anything. And on top of that, All for One can feel that it seems like some of his quirks are deactivated on top of that. Maybe a version of Izuku that could actually cancel quirks similar to Aizawa. But just as they get the quirk cuffs on All for One, Izuku and his eyes begin to peter, turning back to that dark green, or that green that he normally has, and he passes out on the ground. All of his clones fall through the earth as if they didn't even exist, as if they were arisen out of pure sheer will. Izuku is out cold, and he'll be out cold for a while. But with the League of Villains caught, All for One in prison, there's a lot of question marks revolving around what just occurred. And while he's out cold, they're gonna have to speak about it. What do they want to do? There are many things to come. But Izuku may deserve that provisional hero license. Because when I say he was out for a while, he was out for a while. The utilization of a quirk like that, something that he's been working on so that he could duplicate multiple clones at once, he just made a colony worth of people. Now that puts someone out for a long time, frankly. But after a while would pass, he would awaken eventually, and everybody would be waiting. The doctor said he would awaken in some time between that day that they arrived and also 8 to 10 hours after. So it's something that they were all waiting for, and Izuku has finally awakened. They're extremely excited and happy, frankly. Izuku is awake and not in a bad state. He wasn't necessarily in the worst state before, but he wasn't, frankly, in the best either. It's something that Izuku was happy to see, is that everyone was there basically to greet him. It makes him feel that his bit of, sacrifice in a way was definitely worth it. These people that are around him, these people that are here, definitely care. And Izuku, he did something extremely crazy after being put in a scenario that he's never seen before. Still, he'll have some recovery time. He's not all fine and dandy after being, well, completely and utterly choked by All For One, but overall, he'll be fine. And there's one more surprise that Aizawa has, and that surprise would be something that All Might wants to give him, and so does Melissa. They would walk into the hospital room with a small little license for Izuku. The provisional hero licensing exam already occurred, and they had to go through some hoops, but they were able to get him one. Of course, this would be, well, convenient for them because they didn't want to have to get him in super serious trouble for what he did in the first place. Which is pretty good and relevant in general, but he still feels that he caused a far bit of trouble for something like that. But they believe that sometimes you have to sacrifice and you have to be put in a scenario like this, like the one that he was in, to truly show what your true colors are. And Izuku would have sacrificed everything to make sure everyone was okay, and that's the sign of a true hero. Another offer would be made from All Might. All Might telling him that whenever he's ready to go, there's going to be someone wanting him to be ready to go on to basically fulfill a spot at someone's agency. And that is Sir Night-Eye. Currently one of the top 3 heroes in Japan, Sir Night-Eye is, well, pretty well known, you could say. Sir Night-Eye is someone that people respect, people enjoy, people love. Sir Night-Eye is serious, but calculated at the same time. Someone very, very good for Hero Society. On top of that, this will allow Izuku and Melissa to team up once again at the Sir Night-Eye agency and pick up where they left off as one hell of a duo. Bakugo would also walk in and, frankly, in his own Bakugo way, would thank Izuku for basically saving him and putting him in a scenario that was, well, advantageous, you could say. But things are not over, and things aren't even close to being finished. Izuku and Melissa will be headed to Night-Eye's agency, and they'll be put on a case to find Overhaul, the leader of the Shiya Hazaikai, and that is the next test that Izuku will seek, and that is the next test that they'll have to deal with. Izuku Midoriya will face off with Overhaul in the next part 6 of What If Deku Had a Clone Quirk. Izuku Midoriya, after recovering for a while, is now ready to join Sir Night-Eye and even Melissa and maybe even Bakugo, depending on circumstances. But Bakugo won't be joining them this time around. Melissa and Izuku will be joining Sir Night-Eye's agency to help out to the best of their ability. But when Izuku arrives, everything would be hitting the fan relatively quickly. Because when he arrives at Sir Night-Eye's agency, Sir Night-Eye is panicking slightly as he gets a call. Sir Night-Eye gets a call, well, from Mirio. Mirio is currently speaking with Sir Night-Eye about what just occurred. Overhaul. They just saw Overhaul, and he had a little girl that basically seemed scared for her life, and now she's still in Overhaul's possession. As they're saying this, they walk through the door, and Melissa is with Mirio, and she looks pissed. The girl that was very similar to Izuku, someone that's very happy the majority of the time, looks enraged that she wanted to beat the living hell out of Overhaul right when he saw him, or right when she saw him. But she wasn't able to do so. It wasn't the right move. Izuku can see that and walks over to her to calm her down, telling her that they're going to make this right. They're going to get him, and to not worry. She questions if Izuku's really ready to get back on the field already, after just such a short recovery time, and he says that he'll be just fine. As long as he doesn't make a complete colony of people, he should be okay. Sir Night-Eye says that having Izuku in this invasion will have massive benefits. Izuku has clones that are so powerful that he can truly make waves, truly make a difference. And that's exactly what he's going to do. They begin to plan out everything, and many of the heroes question if they should really allow kids to do this. But Izuku is an example. Izuku made waves to even defeat All for One. So not having him on the field would be idiotic. So yes, they're going to have help from kids, but those kids, and some of them, are even stronger than pro heroes. The invasion of the Shiahazaikai is upon them, ready for war. They begin to await the signal and ready to go, but just as Izuku is waiting, a bad feeling rushes over his body. His eyes flash purple, and a giant monster of a man comes racing out. Izuku sends a clone immediately to stop it in its tracks, using his strength clone at maximum capacity. But as he does this, someone else is there to help. A seeming dragon of some sorts, a woman that turns into a dragon, helps stop this monster of a man as they suplex him to the other side of the building. They begin to race inside as Izuku leaves his clone just for a couple more minutes to help out with that fight. He races in with Mirio and Melissa as their goal is to find Overhaul. Mirio dashes ahead using his permeation, and Izuku would do the same. His eyes would flicker and they would change this white color as he begins to fade through each and every wall he sees as he flies through them. Mirio looks to his side and slightly smirks. It seems like Izuku has come to the realization of the powers that he currently has, and even with the rest time he had, it was all mental at that point. He's able to utilize so many of those quirks that he awakened so many of those different clones. Mirio, Melissa, and Izuku. They would arrive where Overhaul currently is, and a fight would ensue. Overhaul versus the three of them, and this fight was no joke. While Mirio and Overhaul were fighting, Izuku would grab Eri, the little girl that basically was captured there. He would grab her and begin running away, but Eri would tell him not to do this. This is a bad idea, that he's going to kill everyone. And Izuku comforts her, telling her that it's going to be okay. Everything will be okay. That no one's going to die. No, not anymore. Izuku would eventually arrive at the outside and be able to get Eri out of there to a nearby building and tell her that she'll be safe here until reinforcements arrive. He calls for heroes to pick up Eri, and when they do finally arrive, he races back into the building, seeing that Overhaul has somewhat transformed and is currently fighting Melissa and Mirio at the same time. But it doesn't look like he's doing the best, so he tries to pull something out of the cards, something a bit cheap, something in the realm of what a villain would do. He would be able to detain Melissa just for a split second, and a bullet would come flying toward her. Izuku, out of instinct itself, would send out a clone that would go dashing forward, his speed clone. A speed version of himself races toward Melissa as he takes the bullet himself, and his eyes of that clone begin to fade and change back to green. But Izuku, he feels odd. He feels weird. Why? Well, why is it like that? What's going on? He immediately disperses the clone, and it seems like he's unable to create more. This is what's going on. Izuku has no idea at all. This is ridiculous. He's never had something like this happen before. Even Aizawa's quirk doesn't work like that. But Izuku is in complete shock. Melissa, though, would take down Overhaul, and so would Mirio, taking him down and arresting him. And Melissa would thank him for doing that heroic action, but ask why his face looks that way. What's going on? And Izuku says that he can't feel his quirk at all. He's unable to use it. Nothing's working. Nothing's happening. And of course, this would be a terrible, terrible thing. a terrible sight for Izuku and something that Melissa would feel extremely guilty over. After they get overhauled the prison and everything is all settled, Izuku would be in complete shock for a while, unable to cope with the idea that his quirk was just stripped away from him, but he had other matters to attend to. After Yue makes sure that Izuku is okay and well off, he would head over to see someone in the hospital, and that's Eri. He would go and see Eri, the little girl that he ran off with to save to make sure she was okay. He told her that nobody would get hurt, and he promised that, and no one did. He would head over there, and he would arrive in her room and sit down next to her, telling her exactly that everyone's okay, but that she's now safe, that she can be happy, a happy child once again. Yes, there are going to be steps to getting to that point, but he promises that everything's okay now, that she'll be safe, and that everything will be just fine. But Eri then brings up something she heard, something from a doctor, that someone did get hurt, and that someone lost their quirk. Of course, Izuku would feel sad hearing this, telling her that everything's okay, that nothing is wrong, and that everyone is healthy and happy right now. Everyone is happy that she's safe, and that happy that she is now in a place that she can have fun as a kid. He wants Eri not to worry about that. There's no reason to worry about that. Deep down inside, Izuku is mortified, frankly, terrified of what's to come, no longer having a quirk and feeling that maybe, just maybe, he's kind of useless now. But Izuku wants to get that all out of his own head. There's bigger things to attend to. This is bigger than everything. He wants to make sure that this child can live a life further and beyond all of this. And maybe one day, he can get his quirk back. He can get his quirk back from Eri herself. Because there's always going to be shadows lurking in the darkness. All for One may be in prison. The League of Villains may be in prison as well. But all it takes is one. All it takes is one breakout, one villain invasion, and all of that would go crumbling. Izuku would head back to Yue and continue to assist where he can. And he was fully prepared to leave Yue because of this incident, but Aizawa made it abundantly clear that he would not be leaving, that he'll be helping in any other regard he possibly can. That whatever they say, he just might be able to get his quirk back. Maybe he doesn't need Eri to rewind him. Maybe, just maybe, he can personally get his own quirk back. Yes, he might think it might be a little outlandish, but it was a clone. It wasn't himself, technically. Izuku, he doesn't know, but he'll try. He'll start from the basics, start from the ground floor, and try to push himself to the point that maybe, just maybe, he'll get his quirk back. So he begins to work. He begins to train. And this is all he can think. Eat, sleep, and get his quirk back. That's it. Melissa would help him. Many others would help him. But nothing is budging. Izuku's quirk is dormant. Unable to be connected. Unable to do a thing. He begins to think that maybe he has to put himself in a crisis situation, but that's just too risky. Putting himself in a crisis as something that he needs, something that needs to happen, it's not something that could happen. It could kill him. He's not invincible. Farthest thing from it. So the fact is that he's going to sit here without a quirk, but he's still going to train, work hard. He's going to use everything that Melissa, All Might, and many others have taught him. He'll begin to help in various other ways, testing gadgets and using different basically items and so on. He'll do everything and anything he possibly can. Unfortunately, he watches training sessions and Class 1B versus Class 1A from the sidelines, seeing his teammates or his classmates fight and train together, where he can't do that, falling short in every regard at this moment. But eventually, this odd chill would go down his spine. Something would be happening under the noses of the heroes, and eventually would be revealed. Shigaraki and the League of Villains are out. They somehow escaped and are now on loose. They're trying to be chased down, but it seemed as if some monstrous creature broke into Tartarus, freeing them. But All For One was not there. He was in a completely different area, unable to be reached, and All For One himself is still in captivity. But now this makes everybody worry, chills down their spines. What happens when the League of Villains seek revenge? Well, what happens is a couple months later, war happens. War between the villains and the heroes is a scary thing. Izuku only being able to help and support via support items and anything he possibly can. But that's it. He's useless. Useless. That's all Izuku can think about. He needs to be out there. He needs to be helping. But he's not. He's not helping at all. He needs to help. He needs to. He thinks of something. A reminder of someone. He opens his door to leave, but before he can, there's someone else there. Aizawa and a little girl by the name of Eri. Eri touches Izuku on the leg as this odd particle effect and also this electricity begin to revolve around him, and his eyes begin to flash various colors. Green, red, purple, white, yellow, blue, every color you can think of. Izuku can feel it. He's back. Aizawa looks at him and tells him that he's needed. Izuku's eyes turn this yellow electricity and he bolts off faster than he's ever been. It's as if his body was changing while the Quirk was away. And now he's even stronger than before. A leap that he would never have been able to make without a massive need to save and help everyone. When he would arrive, Melissa and many others would be fighting off the League of Villains. But Izuku would step foot on the battlefield and shock would begin to shoot through the entirety of all the villains. Shigaraki would smirk, but what he doesn't understand is he's not the final boss. Izuku is. Izuku reaches out his hands and clones begin to disperse. Hundreds, maybe even thousands. The villains are terrified. Shigaraki can't even put words in his own mouth. A colony, a country of Izuku's charge forward and absolutely tear the League of Villains and the army that they brought on them apart, ripping them to shreds, knocking them all out, and capturing all of them using different quirks that he currently has. Izuku has saved the day and once again has his quirk. He sits down on the ground as he looks around to see everyone tattered and beaten, and he slightly smiles. Sorry it took me so long. You know, still getting a hold of this quirk of mine. He laughs a little bit, and everyone else is shocked. Everything is now calm, quiet. A war that looked like was swaying in the wrong direction just swung back in the favor of the heroes. The heroes now are on top. The heroes have won. What does this mean for the future? The future of My Hero Academia and Hero Society? Well, that's a story for another day, and a story that may not be told. So if you enjoyed the entire series of What If Deku had a clone quirk, make sure to leave a like, make sure to leave a sub, and make sure to leave a comment down below, all that good stuff. And I hope y'all have an amazing day. Later.